Shadanke's heart is to do the will of God, and he's not going to let anything stop him in getting there.
I can say that apart from God, Shadanke is not afraid of anyone, anything.
The number of ways in which he's impacted my life personally, I can't even begin to count.
Shodankeh Johnson is one of the greatest leaders of the Christian faith in the world. You'll have a chapter devoted to him when the history of Christian missions is finally written.
In 1745, John Newton, he was engaged in the slave trade. He was on a slave ship called the Pegasus. It seems that he was sufficiently annoying that his fellow shipmates decided to abandon him in Sierra Leone. And he spent 3 years there as a slave before he was rescued. He converted, he became a pastor, and in his church at one point was a teenager by the name of William Wilberforce. Wilberforce was thinking of becoming a pastor, but he was a member of Parliament, and he was ready to give up his seat for that. But Newton told him, no, don't do that. God has placed you in this position. You can have a tremendous influence for good there. You can do good Christian work right in Parliament, and you can have an influence that you would never have as a pastor. And in fact, Newton encouraged Wilberforce to stay in Parliament to work on the abolition of the slave trade.
My name is Shodankeh Johnson, and I grew up in Sierra Leone. Growing up was difficult because I come from a family of 8, 4 boys and 4 girls. It was a difficult life. There was a lot of poverty all around us. It was hard, but one thing, we were very joyful because our father really believed, he was a faithful man that believed in God. And so we went to church every Sunday, serving God and just touching humanity. Started to overtake my life. And when I got to the church, there was a guy who was preaching, and he was talking about just the lost tribes that had no Jesus option, that had no Christian witness among them. At the end of his preaching, he made an altar call, and he said, if there's anybody here who wants to be trained and coached to become a short-term missionary in the north, please stand up. And I put up my hands and I stood up. But eventually he prayed with me, and that's where my journey started. We had a leader that came long after independence, and his name was Shadanke Stevens. And he gradually turned the country into a one-party state. That means it was only his own political party.
The government was really unstable. There was a lot of corruption, there were a lot of factions, there were coups, there were all kinds of things going on. And the result of that was that Sierra Leone was thrown into a civil war from 1991 to 2002.
The war started to take almost every territory in the country. The rebels conquered so many territories, and for so many years, nothing was working, schools stopped. I mean, everything came to a standstill. I literally saw so many dead bodies on the street. There are times you had to jump over dead bodies to go and find food to eat. And there are so many attacks on the road. There were so many ambushes on the road. I mean, convoys were burned down, people died. God really impressed it in our hearts at that time that we started to serve the people in the midst of the war. We will go to communities that we are maybe burned down, or if the rebels attack a community, when they leave, we'll look for people who were either amputated or in pain, and we'll bring them to a place of safety.
In the country, we were seeing so many signs of horrible things. But in the network of churches and the disciples that Shadanke had raised up, there was an incredible spirit of unity, of forgiveness, and that came from Shadanke.
You know, we were not looking for low-hanging fruits. We are looking for high-hanging fruits, where there were really challenges, where the situation was dark, where there was no Jesus option, and where, you know, that the people were really needed the gospel. So we went for this high-hanging fruits, and God, in his own mercy, favored us.
The military commanders who were being called out for the evil that they were perpetrating on the people decided it was time to get rid of him. So they came to his house, a truckload of soldiers, and they caught him there and they tied him up like a sack of potatoes and threw him in the back of the truck.
He was brought in the morning. They locked him in a shipping container in the hot African sun. And he spent the day singing and praying and praising God.
I think this disturbed the soldiers who were guarding him. How we can put you in a container in the sun and you are singing and praying? It is like you should be weeping and asking people to take you out of here, but no.
So he kept singing and praising God until nighttime. The door opened. They brought him out and they said, "The colonel wants to see you."
And I sat down with the guy, just talking to the guy, and he said, "What makes you so bold?" That was his question. What makes you so bold? He said, "When you put people in that container, they cry. But you have been singing. What makes you bold?" And I said, "Sir, do you really want to know what makes me so bold?" He said, "Yes, I want to know." I said, "Sir, the Bible says he that is in me is greater than he that is in the world." And the man just smiled.
So they began to form a relationship, and Shadanke led that man to faith in Christ. And he eventually rose to be the head of the army and opened the doors for Shadanke and his team to train every chaplain in the army.
God has opened my eyes that when you are in the place of faith and you believe God, God will do the impossible. And he has opened my eyes on the impossible. People that nobody expected that they will ever be witnesses for Jesus. I have seen God touch those lives and change them.
Making disciples who make disciples is the way to change the world. And he has committed the last 20 years of his life to doing this. And through his ministry, God has done phenomenal things, unbelievable things.
This is different to have the presence of disciples of Jesus across the country, obeying God, praying for God to intervene for the country. This makes a huge difference.
Shadanke, from many years ago, had a goal that the gospel would be in every part of Sierra Leone. That has happened in a very significant way.
In Sierra Leone, what I saw, is the best way I can describe it is I stepped into the book of Acts and I saw the miracles of the book of Acts, individuals who had been healed, people who had had all sorts of bizarrely wonderful things that God had done in their lives. I saw churches on the frontier where for hundreds of years, no one was able to get through with the gospel.
As I was watching what was happening in Sierra Leone with the schools being founded, and I saw villages change because of clean water, and I really felt like I was seeing a group of pioneers rebuilding a nation because of the work that they were doing. It was also interesting to see how God was getting credit for that.
There's thousands of new churches and tens of thousands of new followers of Jesus who are all there because Shadanke was a pioneer. I think the number of schools that Shadanke and his team have started is now well over 100. And they happen in places where there's no opportunity, and kids need to learn in order to grow. And Shadanke has been there at the forefront of that kind of community development for his entire life.
In the midst of all of this, he has worked hard to do the sorts of work Wilberforce himself did. Now, he doesn't have to abolish slavery, but he is working on healing all of the hurts that exist within his community in the wake of Civil War and all of the other things that have been going on there.
That heart to take other people, take care of them, make sure that they have an education, they are equipped to face life, and also to let God do his work in them. These are the things that have impacted me in my relationship with Shadanke.
God called Shadanke, who was a common, ordinary man, but he allowed God to use him as a servant. And as God has worked in Shadanke and transformed his life, people observe that, and it makes the gospel appealing. I want to serve Jesus the way he serves Jesus.
I look back on all of those things that God has done, all those difficulties, and there's no way in my mind that I would ever think that it was my strength, it was my academic achievement, it was my family, or it was friends that brought me where I am today. No way. I see the hand of God. I see his invisible presence. And I see his glory and the fulfillment of his word. That is what I see.